So there are two people who know FTX perfectly, you and Sam.
There are a few more. It's a very, very high level. It's just incredible if you have the right team with the right mindset, what you can achieve, and also in a very short period of time. Like entering a room of geniuses. In Germany, even Bitcoin and Ethereum are securities.
CBDC is money or is surveillance?
Politicians can do whatever they want. They cannot stop.
Hello. My guest is an interesting mix between entrepreneurship and legal, boring stuff. On top of that, he was a TV station director and a partner at a law firm specialized in cryptocurrencies named Crypto Lawyers LLC. For the last 13 months, he is head of FTX Europe, a name we all know very well. Pat, welcome to the Stabeboard DAO Talks.
Thank you for having me.
I must confess that Amy was my favorite guest, even if I had Vitalik or Raul Pal, so my expectations are through the roof.
I bet, yeah.
Before we dive deeper into the crypto jungle, tell me a few things about you are really proud of, but just a few know about.
So I think especially that we were able in Europe to really offer our perpetual futures with FTX as real perpetuals. So not structured as CFDs or something else. So this is something that only, I guess, lawyers really understand, but it's important also for traders. Perpetuals are different from other products, and also important for the user at the end, because with perpetuals, they are traded between multiple counterparties, and there's not one single counterparty that basically gets a profit when the user loses. That's the case with many CFD providers, right? Many CFD providers in Europe are betting against their clients, and that's what we are never doing with perpetuals. That's why I'm really proud that we were able to create really perpetual futures and are offering them legally in Europe.
I'm curious a little bit about you. What was your first contact with the crypto world?
So, I mean, my history is that I was a software developer at first. So, I started programming as I was still in elementary school. Essentially, I had a Commodore 64. So, it's like a calculator in today's world. But nevertheless, I started programming there. And then after high school, I thought law might be more interesting for me. I mean, I was 18 years old and I thought I know everything already in terms of IT. It took a few more years to realize I did not. But because of this dual background of law and technology, I think that's why I ended up in crypto. I also had a crypto startup in Germany. Not a crypto startup, sorry, an IT startup in Germany for a couple of years. That's how I financed my law, the law study. So, and because of that, I got a few clients that were interested, law clients, in investing into early crypto companies, and
When
that's how
was
I.
that?
This was 2014, 2014,
Oh, super
15.
early.
Yeah. I lived in Switzerland. I moved to Switzerland in 2011, and there were a couple of early startups that were looking into crypto. So yeah, I always followed crypto a little bit since I have this IT background. I had a Bitcoin Core client running, but I didn't took too much attention until this one family office wanted to invest into a crypto startup. That's where I really took a deep dive, and I stayed there. I renamed my law firm to Crypto Lawyers and focused entirely on crypto.
Have you bought anything back then for yourself?
The first coins I bought was 2016.
2016. And what what convinced you to invest back in 2016 when a lot of things were not as clear as they were when the real bull market of 2017 started?
Yeah, 2016, I was already in crypto like almost 2 years. So, and what I saw as a big opportunity is the possibilities that you can create on a global level. So, I mean, the main issue is financial markets are very, very much locally regulated. So that's why you have this trouble right now, also with crypto dealing with different regulators. So, and those regulators sometimes are trying to protect also the economic interests of their local industry from competition from foreign countries. And I saw or I expected at that time that this won't be possible with crypto, because something that is simply transferable, the regulators or politicians can do whatever they want. They cannot stop it. They have to adapt to it. And that was why I decided to invest in 2016. I guess I saw this opportunity that this cannot be stopped. So that's why I thought it can only appreciate in value and not not go down.
How do you feel about your assumption right now?
Yeah, I mean, a couple of things were a little bit different, and you can see that some politicians are trying to issue bans in certain countries or whatever. But I think it's pretty much still the same. So you cannot stop crypto. Yeah, as and certainly not on a one country level, but even if like the European Union would like to ban certain things, it will be very hard. So that's why I think it's always about finding the right compromise here. So I think that's why still my assumption holds true. So
Coming back to FTX, a few days ago, I've seen a press release where you said, and I quote, after launching our European operations earlier this year, we are excited to receive approval from the regulators in Cyprus. Operating under this license will further our goal of being an European entity regulated to the highest standard. What does this mean in plain language for FTX plans moving forward?
So this approval is really a big deal. Also, again, I guess more for lawyers. But what we received here is the approval by the regulator to own this investment firm. And also, Sam joined as a non-executive board member. So getting the approval for a large MiFID II investment firm, which is in some countries, it's even called a bank. So like in Germany, you would call such a company Wertpapierhandelsbank, which is kind of a securities bank. So it's a very, very high level, or almost the highest level. When it comes to trading, it is already the highest level of license that you can get in the European Union. And getting approved through a change of control procedure, because that's what required in order to become the owner. Yeah, you cannot just buy such a licensed institution. The regulator must approve you, and it's a very, very in-depth due diligence process they apply. Yeah, you have to submit a lot of documents. You have to explain what you have done in the past. You have to explain what you are planning to do in the future, and so on. So, and we will now leverage on this license. So your question was, what can customers now expect from us? So now we want to start to basically ramp up our European efforts. So while this change of control procedure was still ongoing, we didn't do too much in Europe in terms of marketing or direct campaigns. So because again, it was uncertain, we wanted to basically not overcomplicate things at that time. But now we are in a situation that we got the approval. We own the investment firm, and now we can start looking into expanding into every single European country, also in a more localized way. So as you have maybe seen, mostly we service everything in English. So now we are working on translations, adapting to local payment channels, and so on and so forth, because this license is truly passportable. So with this one license, we can service every single country in the European Economic Area.
So the hard work for you is just starting.
Yeah. So because so one thing is get this approval, but now basically two things are difficult. On the one hand, you have to structure everything in a way that you remain competitive, and that's sometimes tough in this area, because there are still many players outside that are simply totally unlicensed or are operating under some, how should I call it, licenses that they just use to look more or less regulated, but in reality they aren't. So, and we have a very tough regulator here. We have a very tough regulatory environment. So one difficult piece is here to really make all the products and the consumer experience still extremely competitive, while those others simply do not care. They do not care about leverage restrictions. They do not care about making sure that clients really understand what they are trading. So, but we decided to take to use such a license because we feel it's important to not have users remain uneducated, for example. So we want to make sure they understand what they are trading, how they are trading it, and so on. That's why we appreciate that the regulator is doing it. But what I personally see as a challenge is that there are still competitors that are simply not playing by those rules. And sometimes users, if they see, for example, we have two more questions in the onboarding, they might decide to go to. So working on this also with the regulator is basically the work that needs to be done now. Yeah, so that's why you are right. The work is now really starting. So basically transferring this. Yeah.
Out of curiosity, from a strategic point of view, are you more looking into expanding the FTX brand through acquisitions, or I don't know, establishing local presence under FTX brand? Because we've seen FTX really being really focused on acquisitions, because of the amount that you guys managed to raise, obviously. So I'm curious to know if you can tell us something about the future strategy in Europe, because we've seen many local exchanges in many countries that managed to gather many users because the big brands were not, for example, were not having the licenses in Europe.
Yeah, so I mean, there is no firm strategy like buy one crypto exchange in every local country or something like that. So I think in general, the strategy is just to focus on organic growth. So, but of course, if we come across an interesting opportunity, then it might be worth buying it. So, in general, as I said, if it's a licensed entity, you have to go through this change of control procedure. Then again, in this country, for example, so it's always, yeah, basically a different decision or a difficult decision if it's worse for some specific country. I mean, we have the advantage now with this license that we do not have to set up legally local subsidiaries and get them
Mhm.
licensed in addition, since the license is passportable. So all we need is basically the marketing side, like localization of the website and all the educational material and so on, but we legally do not have to open branches in every single country. So we can run it centralized from our European operations that we have today. So, but nevertheless, as I said, it's not out of the possibility that we might also acquire some, but there's nothing really planned to do so right now.
Cool. You know, you've worked with FTX for the last 12 months or so, and we all know the level of talent that Sam managed to put together there. And I'm curious, what are the most interesting things you learned in the last few months?
So it's I said this once in an interview relatively early on, that is basically like entering a room of geniuses, right? So as I fun fact, as I was still in school, I was a fan of Star Trek: The Next Generation. That was a big thing at the time I grew up. So, and there was once one episode where somebody enters a holodeck and all the geniuses from the whole world
Hmm.
were in this room, like Albert Einstein and what have you. So that's a little bit how it feels like with FTX. So, and what I learned is that if people work together with totally different talents and do it in a way that nobody thinks about personal yeah, I don't know, personal career or whatever, just trying to get the job done and just trying, in our case, to promote FTX, make the customer experience better, that it's incredible what you can achieve. Also, with relatively few people. I mean, if you compare FTX, I mean, our market capitalization is more than Deutsche Bank, but we have way less employees than the Deutsche Bank, so by magnitudes. So it's just incredible if you have the right team with the right mindset, what you can achieve, and also in a very short period of time. As I say, like this change of control, I had to work with almost every every department inside of FTX to get information from what they have done there, how it works, since we had to disclose all of this, and it just worked. Yeah, so it's just amazing.
So there are two people who know FTX perfectly, you and Sam.
And there are a few more that are similar situations, but yeah, no, I mean, yeah, we had to dig into it. But I have a whole team. It's also not just me. To be fair, here we have a great team in Europe as well. As you said, Sam is great in acquiring great talents. So, and I think that's really the strength of FTX. And also, I mean, with my law firm, I worked with different players from traditional finance and from crypto, and that makes FTX really unique. The level of people that Sam brought into FTX. That's still what really amazes me.
In terms of regulation, we've seen ups and downs in the last 2 years, I would say. We've seen even Sam being one of the biggest donors for Biden's campaign. So obviously, there is some interest from the crypto world in terms of having, I would say, a fair regulation, because I don't know if we want special treatment. It's more about having a fair treatment. How do you feel about the crypto regulation from the US? Is like 2023 the turning point for more clarity after we had all these busts with Celsius, Arrows Capital, and so on and so forth? Luna, not to mention.
Yeah, I think yes. So it will be a turning point, also for more clarity. I mean, it's not only limited to the US. I think it's in almost every jurisdiction the case that now we get more clarity. The regulators and the politicians needed some time to understand and evaluate, and that's, by the way, a good thing to some extent, that they were not rushing into some regulations. Some regulator did this mistake. They relatively early on either issued outright bans or made it at least very difficult because they were afraid of what is possible or what could happen. So I think that's why, for example, the US and also some European regulators took a very good approach in assessing first what is the situation and where is really a gap. So there are a few gaps. I mean, yeah, I'm not sure if it's really related to Celsius, but I mean, there are certainly some gaps when it comes to some really bad actors. Yeah, I mean, I'm not sure if regulators can really prevent things if the market turns down. I mean, they are trying to, but it didn't work in traditional finance either. I mean, we had seen banks collapsing in market downturns, and they are heavily regulated. So that's why I'm not sure if it helps there to the extent at least the politicians and regulators might hope. But at least it helps to get rid of some scams and fraudsters, because this is still an issue I think that the crypto world is facing, and their regulations can help. So I mean, I came also as FTX. Always there are scammers like impersonating FTX. So trying to get rid of things like this, I mean, it's also not possible, obviously, by just having stricter laws to prevent fraud from happening. I mean, then we wouldn't need prisons if this would just work like that. So, but at the same time, I think having a little bit more clarity here is helpful for players like us, so that we know better what are we allowed to do, what are we not allowed to do. But it also helps to prevent some scams from happening, because if there are clear rules, you could easier try to do something against them early on, because sometimes you can relatively easily, also as a regulator, distinguish scams from professional players. But right now, some regulators were not even able to do something about outright scams, more or less,
Yeah.
because the burden of proof was too high. So in general, that's why I think more regulation makes sense, but the regulation, as you said, must fit to the crypto world. So it doesn't help to just use the old traditional finance regulation and just put it on the crypto world, because then you might lose all the advantages that crypto brings with it. So, for example, removing intermediaries. Yeah. Like I've seen some proposals in some countries that basically just copy and pasted the old intermediary model to crypto. So this doesn't make sense. You have to basically look, what are the advantages? Where can this technology bring a benefit? And then adjust the regulation to a level that it makes sense. So, for example, you don't have to deal with intermediary risk anymore if there is no intermediary, obviously. So, and things like this. So, but yeah, I totally agree that this will be the new or the year of more clarity and of new regulations in many places, including the United States, but also in Europe. I mean, we have MiCA coming into force. We have some updates on the AML side coming into force in Europe. So there are changes. Yeah. But again, I appreciate the larger clarity. And as I said earlier, a plain level field for everybody is also necessary so that all the players have the same rules, because it's highly unfair that some competitors are spending or trying, as FTX right now in Europe, are getting licensed, having large compliance teams, doing everything that is required to at the end protect customers, and then somebody can just run, something totally unregulated. So that's why I think it helps overall the crypto ecosystem on the one hand to become professional, to attract more institutional players, but also to protect people, because if we have a higher level of customer protection here, then more ordinary people can come into crypto as well, right? So if the risk is mitigated for them, then it helps the overall crypto ecosystem to become more established and more accepted.
We'll come back to MiCA in a second, but before that, we've seen stable coins running the crypto world for quite some time, and there are pros and cons when it comes to stable coins. We've seen Binance creating their own stable coin, and now they are trying to. Actually, they're not trying. Slightly removed USDC from their platform. How long do we have to wait before having a stable coin from FTX?
So I'm not aware that there is even a proposal for this, to be honest. And I think also in Binance's case, it's only a Binance branded stablecoin, if I'm not mistaken. I think it's a stablecoin from a third party, and it's basically the same as they issue under other brands as well. And just one happens to be branded as Binance. So, and I personally do not think that it makes even sense to create more branded stablecoins. So this might make sense from a marketing perspective. I don't know, but I don't think for the crypto ecosystem it doesn't matter. So, for example, with USDC or with EuroC, so I think it's as good as it can get already. I don't see any need for any other stablecoins, to be honest. So, yeah.
Cool. How do you feel about the CBDC the whole saga? Is this CBDC is money or is surveillance?
Okay, so this is difficult. So I mean, this is always difficult with technology. I mean, technology can always be misused. Obviously, you can always use technology either from just outright criminals in a bad way, like hackers and what have you, but also, of course, from governments. Governments can misuse the means technology provides to them. So at the same time, a stablecoin issued by the government can, of course, help for the adoption. And right now, that's why it is so difficult. So you have an issue, for example, right now for many regulated financial institutions like European banks to work with stablecoins, because they cannot treat a stablecoin like cash. Yeah, I mean, essentially it is backed by the dollar or whatever, but it requires a total different treatment. So this will be different if it would be a central bank issued stablecoin. In those cases, the bank could basically treat it like any other money they have on their books. So it might make sense for some areas. So what I hope what happens that even if there are central bank issued stablecoins, that it doesn't mean a ban of privately issued stablecoins, because I think the competition is what it makes, what also brings the whole ecosystem forward. So I think that's the most important aspect here. So I think they can help the crypto ecosystem, central bank issued stablecoins, but they should not be meant as a replacement and not be forced to be used as a replacement for privately issued stablecoins. So that's my take on it. So because they can obviously be misused, but to be fair, this is the same with any stablecoin. I mean, even the government could issue an order to any private company to provide information. And I mean, the blockchain itself is public, so you have a lot of information already there. So surveillance is possible in both ways anyway. So, but it's of course also about innovation and so on. That's why I think private competition makes a lot of sense, and that's what I hope what happens. So even if we see stablecoins issued by governments, that we still have privately issued stablecoins in parallel.
I'm worried about the fact that government hates competition, and approving CBDC means that they will do whatever it takes to push private initiatives or the current stable coins that we have aside, or make them ask them to come with some ridiculous documents, or some ridiculous to make it. Um they will not say they are illegal, but they will make the my feeling is that they will create such a bad legal framework that everyone will say, like, fuck this shit, we don't want to deal with the government, so we will have all these stable coins like slowly dying.
Yeah, I mean there is a certain risk, of course, but now it comes back to one of my first statements that basically governments, even if they want to, they have relatively limited means to really ban crypto entirely, and this includes stablecoin. Yeah, I mean, so they are a little bit limited. I mean, what they can do is they can force licensed institutions, for example, to not touch any private stablecoin, for example, anymore.
Hmm.
So what will then happen? Then just the whole industry will move away from licensed institution and go more to DeFi setups, or users will move to offshore exchanges again, and so on. So I think many politicians are aware that this is a risk, and that they are simply living in a world where even if they want to regulate something, they are just limited by the extent what they can do. And this is very true for stablecoin. Yeah, you cannot simply ban it because people can just use it anyway. So I mean, I mean, it was early at the early times of the internet, very similar. Like some governments tried to block certain websites, and they are still doing it. But I mean, it has also been proven to be impossible, right? You cannot control what you can show over the internet, and I mean, essentially, crypto is the internet of value, if you will. So, and it's the same here. You cannot, or all the governments are limited what they can do. So that's why I think no matter what they do, stable coins will not go out of existence. The only thing that happens is that it will adopt and it will change. So, and I think politicians must be aware that they can create worse situations, because imagine if like the US are all private stable coins. So I guess those companies would just move to other countries somewhere in the world where you might have less protection at the end, yeah, for the holders of those stable coins. So they might just weaken the overall customer protection at the end. So, and I hope politicians are realizing that. But I agree, it is there is a certain risk. Yeah.
But you obviously know the regulators better than I do, and I really hope that you are right. And they will realize what you just mentioned, which makes total sense. I'm curious about Mika. What are the things you really like about that? Because probably Mika is the biggest and the most important piece of legislation that we got from the European Union, right? So, what are the things that you really like about that, and what are the things that you don't have a good opinion about?
Yeah, so I mean, there are two things. So, like the crypto derivatives aspect, which is, I think, most of the trading volume worldwide happens in derivatives, is totally out of scope of MiCA. Just to make this clear, this is already regulated under MiFID, and that's this license we already got. So, where MiCA comes into the picture is when it comes to crypto spot. So, really buying and selling crypto spot. So, and the really good thing from Mika, or that comes with Mika, is that for the first time we will then have a passportable license, because the situation currently is, while for derivatives, as I mentioned, we have one license that covers the whole economic area, European Economic Area. You do not have this available for crypto spot right now. You have to get a local registration in every single country. So example, you want to service Germany and France, for example, you have to go to each country separately and apply for your license, have to go through different requirements. You might end up with different onboarding flows. You might end up with different tax situations. So it's just overly complicated right now to get crypto spot licenses, and this will be changed with Mika. So the biggest deal is that Mika will change this in a way that with one license, you can also cover the whole European Economic Area on a cross-border basis. So, and this helps also in a competition of the different jurisdictions in Europe to basically try to be more open to attract crypto players to get their Mika license in their country. So that's also why it will help the overall crypto space. So then Mika itself, where you said what is not so positive with Mika. So I think it lacks clarity in many areas when it comes to specific token. It's way too much focused on stablecoin, in my opinion. Yeah, I mean, it was largely driven based on the fear that Facebook might come up with the stablecoin, and the politicians rushed into some proposals for Mika to try to avoid this. So that's basically my biggest point of criticism here, that it's too much focused on stable coins and too less providing explanations, for example, for utility tokens and so on. So because it's quite unclear in many areas. So like, what is really the treatment now with governance tokens for a DeFi project? What does it mean? So it could have been provided more clarity there. And the same that NFTs are out of scope. I mean, it says that NFTs might be securities. Yeah, granted. But what is about an NFT that just represents a picture right now? So in the worst case, I still need more than 30 registrations all across Europe in order to sell NFTs, because most jurisdictions include NFTs in their local AML implementation that they have right now in place, because currently it's more or less AML or just AML laws that apply to crypto companies. So that means it could happen that you need basically two things: a Mika license that allows you to trade a lot of crypto assets. But for example, for NFTs, you might end up in a situation that you need a local registration nevertheless. And this wouldn't make sense whatsoever, right? And the other biggest thing is that the AML laws are not regulated by a regulation right now, just a directive. This is a big disadvantage. So I would have hoped that Mika will come into force together with an AML regulation, that we have the same, for example, KYC requirements all across Europe. Because right now you have big differences. Some countries want live video call. This is another huge headache. And this is something, because I mean, it's clear Mika is mostly an online business without personal contact. I mean, it's not like the traditional bank where people walk in. It is an online business because it's crypto. It exists online. So that's why it would have made more sense to combine it with an AML regulation, that also those rules are the same all across Europe.
You know, you've mentioned securities, and we've seen Gary from SEC suggesting that everything but Bitcoin is a security. How do you feel about this idea? And do you think that Ethereum, for example, can be a security, even if I think the utility is pretty obvious?
So, I mean, the issue is there is no global definition of what is a security and what constitutes a security. So that's very important. In Europe, we have MiFID. So MiFID provides some information about what is a security, but some jurisdictions went above and beyond what MiFID defines. So, for example, Germany. In Germany, you have the exact same situation. In Germany, even Bitcoin and Ethereum are securities. You need a license under the German Banking Act to trade Bitcoin or Ethereum. So this is a political decision. So I think, yeah, since my role is more for Europe, I'm not the best person maybe to speak too much about the US. But from my outside perspective, is the SEC is just trying to make a case to be the main regulator for crypto here. That's how it appears to me, because it looks like the CFTC and the SEC are both competing a little bit. Who should be the right regulator? So, and in my opinion, the CFTC would be the better choice, because it is a commodity. And again, the price discovery happens in the future markets, where the CFTC is responsible for anyway. So that's why I think it makes way more sense. So yeah, so the question if Ethereum is a security under US laws, again, this is something that at the end the court would have to decide, but I would doubt it, because as you said, it has utility and so on. But there are, of course, a lot of unclear cases, because specifically in the US, I think the security definition is not as clear as it should be. Yeah, this Howey test gives a lot of, or allows a lot of uncertainty. So, but to be fair, many utility token issuers also promoted their tokens more or less like a security, right? So, but they just said, "Oh, it's a token, it's not a security." So it's difficult. So to some extent, I think the issue was created by some players, and especially some players with bad intentions in the market, and that's what the SEC is, for example, looking at. I guess they are just seeing the amounts of scams or where investors lost money. So that's the issue with many regulators. Regulators are never looking what works well and what is good, because that's the job of the politicians to try to make it grow. So regulators are more focusing on where does a fraud happen, where does something happen that should not happen, where does something happen that is a disadvantage to traditional finance. So that's a general issue with regulators. So, but basically, back to your question, I think infrastructure tokens should never be considered a security, because they simply aren't. It's a total different. You don't even have a central issue. I mean, it starts with that. Yeah. I mean, you have not even somebody who could write up a prospectus, because that's what the security laws are
Yeah.
about. Security laws are mostly about disclosing it to the client, that the client can make an informed decision. So, and that's what MiCA does with utility tokens. They have like a prospectus light, where you have to at least disclose certain things. Yeah.
As we are getting close to the end, let's add some clarity, because I think many people are having this question in their mind. If from tomorrow, let's suppose, uh, in the US, they will declare that everything but Bitcoin is a security, what would that mean for the market and for the US citizen who is interested in buying anything like other projects than Bitcoin?
So, I mean, this theoretical assumption, I mean, it would be tough for existing players, yeah, because they would have to get licenses. So either they partner with somebody or would have to get their license for this. So this is one aspect. So for the users, it might happen that they would be driven to foreign exchanges that are simply working outside of the scope, and or to DeFi projects. So basically to anonymous players in the market. So that's why I said, if something like this would happen at the end, the result would be a weaker customer protection. So it's better to have somebody regulated, for example, in the US or in Germany, which is already in this scenario. You have it defined as security. So it's better, in my opinion, to have somebody in this country regulated, where you know the names, where somebody in the worst case could go to court and what have you. But if you are creating such a complicated setup, like making everything a security, that nobody can really breathe anymore within the country and cannot be competitive, right? So then you are driving the users to offshore players, because again, as I said, over the internet, you cannot ban it. So, I mean, a US person could still go via VPN to some offshore exchange, open the account, does everything there. So the only thing that happens is you are losing control as a regulator. So, and for the user, the user is basically losing protection here, a certain level of protection, and you might even end up with influence from foreign governments, right? If this offshore
True.
exchange is basically influenced by a foreign government, you might provide them information. So basically, core to your question, it would move users to foreign players, to foreign offshore exchanges. That's what would happen.
My last two questions are a little more personal, and I'm very curious about your take. I know spirituality plays an important role in your life. Give me one idea or one story or something like from the Bible or whatever that might be helpful for the people who are watching us to better navigate the crypto world in particular or life in general.
So, I mean, so the best, and this is very good for crypto. The best, basically, thing to say here is maybe treat others if you want to be treated, right? So, I mean, don't scam other people. Don't be unfair to other people. Just play by the rules, or at least the moral rules, and treat other people as you want to be treated. So, because crypto will always remain a little bit, if you want, wild west in terms of that you are, or things you can create facts just by signing a transaction with your private key. So, and those facts are very difficult to basically change afterwards. So even if you want to sue, it might simply be impossible because you might not even know who controls it and whatever. So and that's why I think to make sure that everybody is protected, that everybody should adopt this rule: treat others as you want to be treated. So, and in general, you mentioned this with, with, for example, my TV network. Yeah, I mean, that's a funny fact maybe to mention here, that very often Catholics are relatively libertarian, and that's what crypto is at the end, right? It's a relatively libertarian thing. Contrarily, what you would think initially, you would think it's a very conservative thing, the Catholic Church. But in reality, very often you have a lot of libertarians because historically they were not only listening to the government, to the whatever, to the king or whatever it was in this jurisdiction, but also listening to what the Pope was saying, even though it was more a moral authority. That's why, for example, immigrants, you mentioned the US a lot, immigrants in the US from Catholic countries initially had a very hard time because they were
Mhm.
considered to be not maybe loyal enough to the US, because they are also still listening to a European leader, in this case, the Pope. So that's why I think it's funny that sometimes the religion can also explain why some people have maybe or are more open to adopt to crypto than others. Yeah, but again, treat others like you want to be treated. That's maybe the best recommendation, in my opinion.
Pat, you've been in this space for quite some time right now, and I'm curious, while you are an active part of this crazy crypto ride, do you ever feel that history is being written before our eyes?
Sorry, can you please? I did not get the question.
So, we are part of this crazy crypto ride, and it's easy to get caught in all these daily waves and so on and so forth. And I'm curious, do you ever step back and have the feeling that history is being written before our eyes with this revolution that crypto is generating?
Oh, absolutely. Yeah, no, absolutely. This will change how the world will function in 10 years. I mean, we are really at like the early days at the internet. I mean, I recall the days I used my modem to connect to the internet. I even had this where you put the phone on top of it, right? So I'm not sure how it's called in English. It's not even a modem. So I built it myself for my Commodore 64. So I mean, it's like this. I mean, at this time, you couldn't imagine that something like Amazon, eBay, whatever, Facebook will change how people interact, how businesses will be done. So, and this is what happening with crypto. We had some very early days. We are really like we are putting just the phone on top of it to connect to this network, and only people right now with a deep understanding are in it and are shaping it. And that was the same with the internet initially. I mean, I dialed into some mailbox groups and so on, and had to pull my my messages from there, some news groups and what have you. So, and that's basically where we are in crypto. So yes, we are writing history here. It will change the world. It will also, I think, it will go beyond transfer of value. It will change also political things, because in theory, you could also work on new direct democracy structures with the blockchain, right? Making people vote way easier in a secure way. Yeah. So if they can confirm the identity, it's way easier to vote on certain things, and maybe even on way more low level decisions. So, like, do you want to build a road here or there in your local community? Things like this will be possible with the blockchain technology. So it goes certainly beyond finance. It goes beyond everything with a monetary value. So it will shape the world. So yes, I 100% believe history is written in front of our eyes right now. Yeah.
Here we have a true believer. So, Pat, I know you are busy. Thanks a lot for your time. Good luck in everything that you do, and see you next time.
Yeah. Thank you very much. It was a pleasure to be here. Thank you.